Today we're gonna make croissant. This recipe requires many stages, and this is the simple one, the very first. We're just gonna mix some basic ingredients. We have a pound of milk at room temperature. We have 2.5 ounces of sugar, a pinch of salt, and a tablespoon of yeast. So the first thing we're gonna do is to sprinkle the yeast on the milk and let it sit for a little bit. Then we're gonna mix the flour with the sugar and the salt, and we're gonna mix this with a whisk. Make sure that the ingredients are combined. Then we make sure that the yeast is fully dissolved into the milk, and then we combine the two. I like to use a spatula for this because I'm sure to scrape the walls of the bowl and not to leave, dry bits of this dough. Once this is mixed very well and I don't see any wet or dry spot, any homogeneous, then I'm gonna just wrap this very tightly in several layers of saran wrap. So this is the stage in which we are going to laminate the butter. These are 10 ounces of cold butter cut into 2-ounce chunks that we need to pound with a heavy rolling pin on a little bit of flour, enough so that it doesn't stick to the counter. And the goal is to make it as thin as possible. So we're going to toss it in the flour just a little bit and then start pounding. After the pounding phase, this is the butter. As you can tell, it's not very thin. So if it's still very cold, we can use it as, pizza dough or pasta dough and just roll it gently to make it as thin as possible. So this is the dough we prepared 8 hours ago. Had been fermenting in the fridge, wrapped in plastic. I unwrapped it. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna roll this dough, and the goal is to make a rectangle more or less the size of a regular cookie sheet. It's quite sticky, so I need abundant amount of flour on the bench and on the rolling pin. So I start by hand by flattening the dough, and I'm keeping the shape more or less that of a rough rectangle as I go. It's easier than shaping later. I just keep the shape as I go.
Nous goûterons à l'amour et l'eau fraîche. Et puis quand viendra le nouveau matin.
Okay, this is the shape we were looking for. So this is the stage where we incorporate the butter. This is the laminated butter we prepared before. It's nice and cold. You just don't want this to melt in your hands. And we're gonna roughly cover 2/3 of this dough. I'm gonna overlap things a little bit and leave a little border around, because that's what I'm gonna use to seal the package I'm gonna create. It's a lot of butter, but it's worth it. It's a lot of flavor. So we're not too concerned about diet when we talk about croissant or sweets in general. So I'm sealing the edges like that, trying to keep the shape of a rectangle, and then finally I fold the other third on top of the rest. And again, I'm sealing the butter layers inside. And now this is the tricky part. I have to lift this and turn it by 90 degrees and roll it again. That's where you need to practice several times before it comes out I would say perfect, but you know, where it's not a mess. Good amount of flour on top again. Start by pounding with the rolling pin. I'm not rolling right away because the butter layers might crack. Now that the butter has softened a little bit, I can roll again. More or less the same shape I had before. We have the rectangular shape once again, and then we'll let this sit in the fridge overnight. This is it. Wrap it tightly in plastic, 2-3 layers, because it might explode if the yeast activity is very powerful. And then we're ready to go. In the next phase I'll show you. This is our dough after it has fermented overnight. Sorry, you cannot smell. This is fantastic already. I don't know if you can see, but all the layers that we created with dough and butter are still visible. And these are going to be compressed now, but they're still going to be there when we put it in the oven to make a flaky dough. So this is our dough. It needs to be put on a heavy floured surface because it tends to stick. So start by pounding by hand and then with the rolling pin. At this point we're going to let the dough rest for a couple of minutes on the bench. And then with either this tool, which is a croissant cutter, basically if I roll it on the dough, it's going to cut the dough into perfect shaped triangles, all the same size. Or you can use a ruler with a regular pizza cutter and to obtain the same thing. So we have one of our triangles and one scrap of dough, which we need to shape the croissant. The first thing to do is to cut a little in the middle like that and to stretch the dough a little bit. We don't want it too thick, especially at the edges. Then you put your triangle on the bench. You make a little bowl with the scrap, put it in the middle, and then after pinching slightly, you pull with your right hand or left hand, depending on your normal habits, and you roll by keeping this end stretched until you reach what already resembles a little croissant. You have these two flaps that need to be rolled in the same direction, and this is gonna be put on a lined cookie sheet with parchment paper or a seal pad, and we're gonna let it proof, meaning, you know, we're gonna let the yeast do its work once again, and just before putting it in the oven, when it's nice and spongy, we're gonna brush it with a little bit of egg and milk and bake it at 400 degrees for about 12 minutes. With the same dough that we made before, we can make pain au chocolat. It's much easier. All we have to do is to cut the dough into rectangles and then take some chocolate, baking chocolate, or even regular semi-sweet chocolate, and roll a little bit inside the dough. If the dough is a little bit dry, you might want to use some egg wash in the middle, just to seal it. Then you press down a little bit, you leave the seam down, and you put it on your cookie sheet. Our croissants and pain au chocolat are ready. As you can tell, they have a nice, thick, flaky crust, and I'm just sorry you guys cannot taste them. Goodbye.